Ever heard of a technical program manager role? Did you even know it existed? Well, this is the conversation you might want to pay attention to. Meet Krista Palmer. She is a technical program manager at Google, and not only is she sharing tidbits on her LinkedIn page, but she started CX with Kris to help get others into this space. Join us as we dive into this conversation. But before we start the show, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you find any value along the way. So the first question I had for her is, can you tell us a little bit more about CX with Kris? Where did it all start? Who do you serve?
And thank you so much, Joe, for having me on your show. I hope that I can provide value for your listeners. So to give a little, an elevator pitch about what I do. So I'm currently a technical program manager at Google Play. I specifically work on providing custom infrastructure that's needed to integrate with third parties. And you can say third parties, anybody outside of Google. Outside of work, I also help people who want to transition into technical program management. So I know when I applied for the role, there wasn't a lot of information around what the role is, how do you get into it, what skills I need to highlight. So I was thinking about this year, do I know? I have a background in tech, went to school for all those things, but didn't feel confident enough to be able to teach people. Learn about programming and things like that. So I thought, well, I know technical program management. I think I'm pretty good with helping people understand the role and get into it. And so that's what I do outside of work.
Secondly, I asked her, what are the most important skills or qualifications needed to transition into a technical program manager role, especially for those coming from a non-technical background?
Great question. So it honestly started this year when I thought about, I was going back and forth around what can I do as a business? What can I do where I don't have to start from scratch? What do I feel somewhat confident in? And so I posted on LinkedIn, I said, I've had a lot of failures as a technical program manager, but I've also learned a lot. And so anyone who has questions about the role, please reach out. I got a swarm of people that reached out, which was surprising to me. And it happened, I guess the beautiful thing about LinkedIn, when you post something you posted 2 months ago, it can still bring people in. I don't know how the algorithm works exactly, but through that time, as I was on the phone with people, similar questions kept popping up. And for the longest, I did not want to do technical program management because in my mind, I don't think I'm the LeBron James or the GOAT of TPGM. I'm not really good at this, so how can I teach people about the role? But then some people reached out about interview help, resume help. I gave them my advice. They moved on to rounds. One person got an offer, and I thought, well, maybe I do know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm I always think of a Phil Jackson. I don't think he was the greatest basketball player of all time, but he led people to championships, really good players. And so I thought, well, maybe I can do that. And so I faced my fear, still facing my fear to this day around just diving in and just giving the information that I know. And then also gaining more confidence as I've been helping people, realizing I do add value, but it came out of me wanting to do something outside of work, leveraging what I know, and also realizing it's the most that I can talk about in terms of day-to-day, what teams would be looking for, and people have had some success with it.
Third, I asked, how do you help clients tailor their resumes and LinkedIn profiles to stand out in the competitive job market for TMP roles?
So I like to break down the TPGM role as 70 to 80% project management, program management skills, 20 to 30% technical. In terms of the skills needed to transition, I think in no particular order, but top of mind, being able to add order. I feel like as a project manager, program manager, at the end of the day, you're leading people towards a goal. It's your scope that grows, project versus program. And so a big part of your job is someone hands you a problem. Maybe it already has a project in place, maybe it doesn't. And you have to get various different people aligned around this goal. So being able to add structure, add order, and that could be in terms of project delivery. I think a big part of what I've learned in this role, it's also because a program is a mixture of different teams who work differently, have their own workflows. Processes are a big thing. So how do you get these collective people to work together effectively and in a way that makes sense, where it's not too much bottleneck, but at the end of the day leads people forward? Another big thing is communication. So especially as a technical program manager, you're working with technical teams, non-technical teams. Each of them has their own priorities of what they care about for a program. So what's important for maybe engineering leads versus UX leads versus marketing leads, even legal, they all want something different, or they care about different things. And so being able to bubble up what's most important for them. Also in terms of communications, being able to be proactive. So I feel that a good TPM has kind of sixth sense, but after some time of you working with the team, understanding how they work, their dependencies, you can get a gauge around, oh, I think this may be an issue. And so being proactive in terms of communication, of asking the right questions, bubbling up possible concerns to the right people, that's definitely important. I think also one of the most important things about a TPGM is when you do your job, other people flourish in their role. And so being able to identify what different folks care about most, what do they need in order to do their job? That could be what meetings do they need to be included into, what requirements do need to be called out by product, are all important, because at the end of the day, I feel like you're a background but on the frontline player. And it's not about my role, it's about how is what I'm doing impacting and allowing other people to do their role. In terms of the 20%, 30% part of the technical, the advice I give people is find a domain. So there are technical program managers. Tech is large, right? And there are technical program managers needed in almost every space. So whether you're thinking about security or privacy, mobile applications, social media, which I realize are a form of mobile applications, really understanding the domain that you want to get into. And so that means understanding, hey, if I want to build a mobile application, what are the different pieces that are needed to build that mobile application, understanding the different teams involved. And I find that is important, because even though you, a technical program manager, you're not the most technical person in the room, you are inherently deep involved in technical products, and so therefore technical conversations come up, and you have to be able to follow what's being said in terms of understanding feasibility. If product has a feature that they want to build, or UX has a proposal that can't be done, it's important that you understand technically what's going on so that you can communicate that to people who may not have been in the room when decisions were made. Also, just to stay afloat in terms of, there's nothing worse than being in a meeting and not being able to follow what the engineers are saying, and then it just builds upon itself. And then also the technical piece comes into play, because I feel like there's kind of a repetitive nature when it comes to building software. Most likely the same teams are involved, most likely the same amount of steps are involved. And so becoming a subject matter expert in your domain, so with the team that you're working with, also can help you when it comes to becoming more senior and getting more involved in strategic conversations of understanding, this is what we've done historically, this is where we're going moving forward. And because of your technical knowledge of the teams, just helping you be involved in those conversations if that's something that you want to do as a TPGM.
Can you share specific examples of how someone with experience in sales or project management can successfully transition into a technical program manager role?
That's a great question. So it kind of goes back to what I said previously about making sure that somebody understands the domain that they're in or that they're interested in. So if you want to become a TPM for AI versus cybersecurity versus, let's say, mobile applications for consumer goods, you're going to want to highlight different knowledge that you know, and identifying the domain. If the person I'm working with doesn't have the expertise of, let's say, cybersecurity, they're like, I would like to go into cybersecurity, but I don't know much about it. I think it's identifying how to bridge that gap. Luckily, I feel that 90% of technical knowledge, it's really, you can learn it online. Videos, courses, even informational interviews, so talking to somebody who may be in that role. So that's my approach if someone's coming from a non-technical background. In order, I guess another piece of how to enhance somebody's resume or LinkedIn is really understanding the jobs that they're going after. So with technical program management, some big themes that pop up: cross-functional collaboration, because you're working with so many teams. And so a big part of what I like to highlight on somebody's resume is how they've worked with cross-functional teams. And cross-functional teams, it doesn't necessarily have to mean technical, non-technical, it just means teams in different domains. Also highlighting their impact. So I find sometimes it's not about you being able to be on a project where you manage 5 different projects, 10 different projects, even if it's 2 to 3, what was your impact? What did you improve? So I mentioned earlier processes. If there's any enhancements that someone has done, so identifying an issue, identifying that maybe that issue or pain point could be fixed by a process, highlighting that, because that's a big piece of technical program management. It's sometimes I find that my day-to-day role is less about execution and more about not the nitty-gritty, but how teams work together. Usually there's misalignment between teams, and so being able to highlight that on your resume if there's anything that you've done along that lines and gone outside of your day-to-day scope.
Next, I ask, what tools, certifications, or courses do you recommend to build the technical expertise required for TPM roles? And how important are they in securing a position?
So I haven't worked with someone in sales, but the example that comes to mind is someone that I've worked with who was in a nonprofit. They were in a nonprofit, they were a project manager, and they wanted to get into program management. I'm going to bring up this example because I think this can be applied to sales and just anyone who's in a project management scope. I find that sometimes asking the right questions teases out experiences that you've had that have aligned with a role. So with the person that was working in nonprofit, they had the people within their nonprofit that they were working with, external stakeholders within the community that they were working with, as well as when it came to applying for grants, people who were within organizations that supplied money to nonprofits. And so in teasing out more of what he did with working with those different teams, it was very clear that in terms of bringing them together in meetings, understanding their needs, he was able to deliver on projects, create artifacts that were tailored to these different people, which is critical because as a program manager, technical or non-technical, a big part of your job is informing stakeholders, keeping stakeholders up to speed. And that means possibly creating presentations, creating one-pagers. So a one-pager, just a short document outlining what the program is about, the approach of the program. And so with this individual and diving into their experience and teasing out the different teams he worked with, we were able to identify projects that were pretty large in scope. Another part, I think, of being able to craft his story of navigating into program management was also running with an idea. So sometimes within my role, I think within program management, someone can bring up a problem and give no direction on how to solve it. They could be in a meeting and say, hey, somebody was having an issue or has an issue with with an approach on one of the projects there may be pushback for some technical implementation. I bring that up to say, in those instances, stakeholder alignment is key. And so in his experience, calling out ways in which he aligned different people around proposals, around strategy, not having any direction given for that. So that is another way that helped him craft his program management experience. But I think overall for sales or project management, any experience that you've had working with different teams, any experience that you've had, or different teams, cross-functional teams, any experience that you've had proving the dynamics of a team, usually through, could be a process. I realize processes can sometimes be heavy-handed, but I guess any way you improved a dynamic. And then also in terms of impact. So a big thing that he did is with work in nonprofit, because he was able to get grants for his nonprofit, the impact that had in the community. So in terms of sales, how that impacts the business's bottom line. In terms of project management, how it impacted possibly user metrics. If you have internal or external users that are using a system or service that you're building. So I think in either of those roles, being able to communicate clearly what your impact has been, which gave improvement to the business's bottom line or your organization or just the group that you work with as a whole.
Next, what advice do you give those who face imposter syndrome or feel like they lack enough technical skills for a TMP role? How do you help them overcome these challenges?
And so I'll start with this. Not all technical program manager roles are created equal, meaning some technical program manager roles, I think within my posting, within the posts that I make, I definitely try to make it clear that you don't have to be the most technical person to be a TPGM, but some teams want that. And so for some teams, there aren't an amount of certifications that can make up for not working with engineers, not working with technical teams. But there are a lot of roles where having the knowledge of, they call it SDLC, the software development lifecycle, that's critical. Going back to the repetitive nature of software, there are a certain amount of steps that have to be done before something gets deployed into production. And so understanding the software development lifecycle is key, because that also helps you better understand what is my role as a TPGM within these different stages. One thing I realize I have not mentioned is the importance of data. So whether in a sales role, project management role, definitely within my role, data plays a huge part. And so while I am not the one who owns the features for a product, the product manager does that. Nothing can be shipped without some form of data to back it up, of why we're adding this feature, why we're removing this feature. When something is within production, right, that's also another round of looking at data in terms of software health metrics. So I think that's a important thing to know. Latency, crashes, jank, understanding, especially if you want to be in the software realm, how do you measure the success of software? Because as a program manager, you are the one bubbling up these updates. So understanding software health metrics, understanding user engagement metrics. And so as a program manager, you work very closely with product. Product identifies, hey, this is how we are going to measure success for a feature. But it's also important as a program manager to know that too, because within these meetings, it's not like you're a fly on the wall. You are engaged, you are at times helping to lead the direction of like, what can we measure in terms of measuring success for a product. So I think understanding user engagement metrics, what those are, why they're important, especially for the company that you're interested in applying to. And then I think the analogy I like to give is, let's say there's a bakery, right? I think whether the bakery makes croissants, cakes, cookies, while you aren't the one baking, opening the oven, mixing the ingredients, you should have an understanding around what are the steps, what are the ingredients needed to make a croissant, make a cake, make a cookie. And so going back to choosing your domain, if it's cybersecurity, what are the different pieces needed in order to make software secure? Or if there's a domain within cybersecurity, how do they create the services and products within this domain? Same with AI. If you're interested in generative AI, what are the different pieces that are needed to build Gen AI products, services? And so once you've chosen a domain, making sure that you understand how to build products and services in that area. And then I think that's my suggestion on how to get certificates and things that you can do to get spun up on the technical side. So I think for that, what I've told people who have worked with me who have no technical experience, have not worked with a technical company, have not worked with technical teams, is being strategic. That I think sometimes, especially depending on the company you want to work for, you may have to go 2 steps before you get into the technical program manager role. So within tech companies, there are TPGM roles and PGM roles. PGM roles, so I'm bringing this up to say sometimes there's no replacement for working with engineering teams and understanding how they work, what they can push back on, what are the nuances that come up when designs are being created, requirements are being flushed out, that maybe directly applying to a TPGM role is not the best step, but going the PGM route within a technical company. Because within that, you're working with technical teams. You're understanding what are the steps in building software. And so I think number one I like to bring up is all of this can be learned. None of this needs a degree. None of this needs hours and hours and hours on end of looking at videos. But what is needed is that hands-on experience. And so sometimes, especially if there's a job, like for example, I know some TPGM roles within Google, they call out, you need to work with engineering teams. And so if that's not the case, if the person doesn't have that experience, what I tell them is, well, let's look at PGM roles within tech companies that don't outline that you have to work with engineering teams, but more outline that you have to have program and project management skills, which is as I mentioned, 70 to 80% of the job anyway. Another thing that I mentioned is that at the end of the day, when you become a TPGM, what's most important is how you treat people, and also doing your job to let others do their job well. Making sure that within their resume, within their LinkedIn, we call out how they're a team player, that they've worked with different teams. They understand how to tailor communications, tailor approaches, where it's not like everybody follow my lead, but really taking into account what do these different teams need and how can I provide that, or how have I provided that within my role, whether sales, project management, in order to help all these group of people move forward. And so I guess overall, I think sometimes it can, and I've heard it can be discouraging when you look at technical program manager roles and they're like software development experience, 5+ years working with engineering teams. And yes, sometimes there's no getting around that. There's no certifications that can make up for that. But there's always another route to get into TPGM roles. And that's where it can be more looking at TPGM roles that don't call for that, right? Making sure that it's very clear you are an expert in your domain, really understand the needs of your domain, what it takes to build something in your domain. And I think third, which depending on the person, it may not be the easiest to understand, but maybe you go the PGM route and then work your way into TPGM. Because it's like I said, it can be sometimes easier to be a PGM at a Google or a big company versus a TPGM. And then while you're there, you're learning the technical experience, you're learning what it means to work with these technical teams, and then move over. But there's always a path forward, and as long as you have the experience or get the experience of that project management skills, then you're more than okay.
Any last words?
I think the last words that I would say is that there's always patterns that are called out with technical program management roles. I think the first part is identifying the domain that you want to be in. So do you want to do AI? Do you want to do something that's cyber? Do you want to do something that's cloud? Finding those roles and seeing what are they calling out the most. And then if you can, reaching out to other technical program managers to understand what is the technical expertise that they're asking for in this role. Because I think sometimes that can be confusing. You read a role and you're like, how technical do they want you to be? And sometimes that's not the easiest, but I think some folks may be surprised if they're calling out, hey, we want you to work with technical teams. It may be different than what you're thinking about in terms of what does that mean. So really dive into the TPGM roles that you're interested in, how they vary across teams, and then look realistically around your experience, what you can get sped up on in terms of the technical experience or the technical knowledge. And then also weigh your options of PGM versus TPGM, but there's always a path moving forward. And unlike becoming a lawyer, where you definitely need a legal degree of some case, TPGM is not like that, but it can sometimes be a longer game in order to get into that role versus maybe with software engineering, take a course, get a cert, you have a portfolio of projects clearly showcasing, hey, I can engineer, and TPGM isn't like that, unfortunately.
Now that was it. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, if you find any value, to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'm pretty sure you'll like to check out this video as well. See you on the other side.